presence is a topic, a hot topic for conversation and books and so forth. And there are a lot of people who are interested in presence. Well, we know that being more present allows us to see things that we're not seeing and to experience what we're not experiencing. And there's that tendency to be caught in an abstract world where we're not present any longer. And the real question is, when you're present, who is it who's present? Who is the one who's present? Now, takes us back to the who am I question and the question of self. And Joseph Ledoux, who is a neuroscientist, wrote a very interesting and provocative book called The Synaptic Self. And it's not light reading, but it's an interesting book because from a neurological perspective, he makes the case that the self that we think we are in any given moment is a conglomeration of memories and synapses in the brain. And I think that's probably not far from the truth. As you look at how the brain works, he mentions in the book that we are born with these synaptic connections. These synaptic connections between neurons are what link the centers of the brain together. And when you have a memory, let's say you have an experience, a wonderful experience, maybe romance is in the air, you go out on a date and you just have this beautiful time, you dance in the moonlight and so forth, and you've got all these centers in your brain. You've got the optical center that registers memory in the visual cortex, and you've got olfactory centers for smells and touch and all these different centers, and memory is recorded. So the memory of what something looked like and what it smelled like and so forth, and all of these memories are carried to perceptual centers in the brain so that you can perceive them and actually remember and experience. And to go along with that, there's the narrative that says, oh, that was an awful time, or that was a wonderful time, or I was really scared, and whatever it is. All of those kinds of perceptual memories converge together into one location, and it happens through these synapses. A memory is recalled simultaneously from different centers. It's pulled together, and then there's this consciousness somehow that says, I remember that. Well, who is the I who remembers that? That's the question that Joseph Ledoux tries to deal with and try to uncover. And what he really comes up with is that there is no stationary, consistent I. And that in any given moment, the I may be perceived as something, it's whatever memories are remembered, it's self-image. We have all these kinds of things that relate to who I think I am. But the mind keeps some sense of consistency through the whole thing, so you don't see how fragmented it is with all these memories and so forth. Well, here in the present moment, as you sit and you let the abstractions and the stories and so forth subside, and you just be with what is, you have the opportunity to experience almost a selfless moment. And there's nothing wrong with the self. I mean, that's part of what we do in growing up is we become a self in our young years, growing up, trying to conceptualize the world. We build ego strengths, and we build this sort of central ego self, and it needs to be strong. But then at some point in your life, as you start to realize, okay, now I'm at the point where I need to ask, what is it all about? And try to assimilate all that I've learned through the course of my life. You have to realize that that ego self is very ethereal. It's very inconsistent. And sometimes, depending on your mood, it will drive you to sabotage your life. Sometimes it will drive you crazy because in a given moment you can't even appreciate and be here because your head is running away with stories. We go running after things like drugs and money and all these kinds of things. Why? Because at a given point in time, the self decides that it's on a quest. It could be a quest for enlightenment. It could be a quest for riches. It could be a quest for anything. But that quest keeps you continually projecting into the future and out of the present moment. I can't be happy with this because I have to have that. And all of this from a neurological standpoint is just a whole lot of neural impulses. And the question that Ledoux asks is, can you change the self? And he answers that by first of all saying that some of these synaptical connections in your brain were inherited. And some of them were formed during childhood and at various stages in your life. But we have billions of synaptic connections in our brain. Many of them are unused. He even makes the case that it's possible at whatever age you are to form new synaptic connections. So we find a lot of people who are talking about the present moment. Eckhart Tolle talks about an experience that he had that left him on a park bench for 2 years. Tony Parsons talks about an experience where he was walking through a park and had a tremendous shift that changed his life from that point forward. And in the present moment, what can happen as we start to see that these abstractions that we thought were real are indeed a facade, and even the sense of self often is an abstraction, that a shift can take place. Now, I think if you had a discussion with Joseph Ledoux, he would tell you that some of this shifting that you experience is actually happening on a physiological basis as neural impulses, neural traffic of how one center in your brain communicates with another actually gets rerouted through another synaptical connection. And when that happens, it's changed. Now, the same thing can happen taking psychedelic drugs like LSD and that sort of thing. What happens is your synaptic connections start to change. Neurotransmitters, which are the way that the neurons fire off and send transmissions to other the neurotransmitters are changed. Everything is changed. But then, after you come down from the drug, you come right back to the old connections again, and everything looks like it always did. But back in the 60s, you saw a lot of people looking for some kind of enlightenment, some kind of present moment nirvana, some kind of light through taking those kinds of substances. Now what we find, more and more people are realizing that there is a more or less permanent shift that can take place in your awareness and your consciousness just as you live in the present moment. As you live here and you start to look at self, this assumption that I've made that there is some consistent self here. And somehow let go of that and just be here. Not just sitting in meditation, being in the present moment, but learning how to walk and live and do things and get things done and interact with people with higher and higher and higher degrees of presence. So that when that self and that story rises up, you see it rise up. Just like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, you see it rising up. And you know what it is. The problem with most of us is it rises up. We don't see it rise up. It just happens. And we're so identified with it that we become it. And our stories sweep us away. Away from what? Away from the present moment. Away from right here, where we live, where we are. Away from our real selves, whatever that may be. You know, as soon as you try to define who your real self is, you're creating another abstraction. The only thing you can really do is just be here with it and just observe. Just see what you see. If you want to find yourself, that's the way to do it. But it's not something you do in meditation. It's something that you do every day, and it becomes a practice. The practice of living in the present moment.